And now for today's Olympic results, my co-anchor Bill Weir joins us from London. Bill?
Cynthia, I tell you, one way or another, one part of Team USA figures out a way to thrill us on a daily basis. Here in London tonight, it was the women's soccer team. In extra minutes, beat our North American neighbors Canada to advance to the gold medal game against Japan. But disappointment for Gabby Douglas, finishing last in the uneven bar. She has one more shot at precious medal tomorrow on the balance beam. Meanwhile, a lot of excitement and a little bit of a suspicion bubbles up every time somebody puts a world-beating number on a scoreboard in that stadium across the way. Despite reinvigorated testing efforts, every Games is haunted by doping scandals past. This Games, no exception. So we wondered, how clean are the athletes of London 2012? And the answer depends on who you ask. In the soft London afterglow, Usain Bolt's 100-meter win is being called the greatest race ever.
Usain Bolt explodes!
But those with long memories might recall another sprint that received equally ecstatic billing in the days after. When Ben Johnson beat Carl Lewis at the '88 Games in Seoul, the world swooned over the Canadian's superhuman speed. Until 3 days later, when he tested positive for steroids and was sent home in a cloud of scandal. And now, 24 years later, that final is considered the dirtiest race in history. Because as journalist Richard Moore points out in his new book, 4 other sprinters in that race went on to suffer doping scandals of their own. So it wasn't just Ben Johnson.
No, and that's the point, I think. You know, at the time, he was made the scapegoat. And I wanted to draw attention, I suppose, to the fact that he probably wasn't the only one.
The man who ultimately won that tarnished race is Carl Lewis. And after Bolt's stunning performance in Beijing, he was the highest profile name to raise suspicion, saying, quote, "If you don't question Bolt's times in a sport that has the reputation it has right now, you're a fool, period." But the doping control officer at the Salt Lake City Games disagrees.
Usain Bolt is a fantastic runner. When a bunch of athletes start to complain, yeah, there might be reason or there might be jealousy. Again, it's innocent until proven guilty.
When American officials questioned the blazing times of young Yi Shiwen, the Chinese were outraged and aimed similar innuendo at Michael Phelps and Katie Ledecky. Like Bolt, they are athletes with clean records competing in sports with dirty pasts. So what has changed in 20-plus years?
One thing that has changed is we've got a World Anti-Doping Agency now, which is the independent body that sport always needed. In those days, you had sports policing themselves.
In addition to this Just Say No campaign, the IOC says a record 5,500 athletes will be tested at these games, but so far, they've only ejected 5 obscure names: an Albanian weightlifter, an Uzbeki gymnast, and an American who tested positive for marijuana after finishing 7th in judo.
And then they've got to be really sure they're going to get the molecule they want, so they then measure the mass very, very precisely with this device here. And you get something looking like the peaks you see over there.
Chris Cooper is a biochemistry professor at the University of Essex, author of Run, Swim, Throw, Cheat. He believes less than 10% of Olympians are doping. The hard part is figuring out which ones. When you watch the games and you see an amazing performance, what goes through your mind? Any suspicion?
No, I enjoy the performance. You can't tell who's doping. Then it puts every athlete's performance into doubt. And I know people who I know haven't doped, and they say, the public will come up to them and say, you must have been doping to get this time. So I think as spectators, we should not have that instant suspicion.
And is there more scrutiny for the better athletes? People in the Usain Bolt class? Is it harder for him to dope than it would be for an obscure discus thrower?
I wouldn't say it's unusual performances that trigger it. It is patterns of behaviour.
We have a very expensive drug testing program here in London for these Olympic Games. I wonder how effective that is, whether it's money well spent. You know, it's like airport security, checking everybody. How effective really is that as a way of combating terrorism?
As for Bolt, he's long maintained his skills come from his parents. His Twitter bio boasting the most naturally gifted athlete the world has ever seen. Which makes this picture even more impressive. Bolt tweeted a shot of himself with the Swedish handball team at 3:45 a.m. And he still has 2 races left to run. He is superhuman in many ways.